One of a number of Chinese Jamaicans who would have a massive impact on the shape and direction of Jamaican music was Herman Chin-Loy, who would leave an indelible mark on reggae music as record spinner, record seller, producer, occasional artist, and even studio owner. Stay tuned for my look at Herman Chin-Loy.
That rock the nation. Great booga booga for Aruba. Mommy dada job center. My killer bram bram lock it to me snack boogity. While I present Iggy Iggy. Mommy dada.
The Chinese had first arrived in Jamaica after slavery was abolished in 1838 as indentured laborers, many choosing to remain on the island after their terms of service were ended, raising their families, starting businesses, and integrating themselves into Jamaican society. Herman Chin-Loy would be a descendant of these people, fully Chinese on his father's side and half on his mother's. She was also half African, so he's 3/4 Chinese. He would be born in the rural parish of Trelawney in Jamaica, July 11th, 1948. Later moved to Clarendon and then to the capital city of Kingston around 10 years old, circa 1958. From there on, he moved around quite a bit, staying with various relatives. He did not do well in school. His focus was not on his studies. He even got sent to a reform institution at one point. His family were related to the Kongs, who had a record store and ice cream shop called Beverly's, member of whom, Leslie Kong, would have a massive impact as a producer in Jamaican music, sometimes known as King Kong. Leslie Kong, seen right there, would be the first man to record both Jimmy Cliff and Bob Marley, as well as producing classics like Desmond Decker's Israelites, the Melodians' Rivers of Babylon, and many more. Young Herman Chin-Loy would be attending school dances, would do a bit of singing. His idols were R&B stars like Sam Cooke, Nat King Cole, and others, and he would get his first taste of the music business by working behind the counter in the Beverly's record shop. Around Christmas time, when it was the busy season, they needed help. Teenaged Herman would pitch in behind the counter. Later on, about the mid-60s, after he had left school, the Kongs would help establish him in his own first record store, which would be called One Stop, and would be located in a spot they had scouted out for him at 125 King Street in downtown Kingston. He would go into it with another Chinese Jamaican, Neville Fu Loy, apparently a jeweler by trade. Herman would remain there for a few years, getting a reputation and a knack for selling records, for having a talent for spotting what his customers were looking for, being able to point them in the right direction. He had a natural gift for sales, but while he always had one eye on the cash register, he believed in the music, loved the music, and loved connecting people with something they would enjoy. And that was his prime motivation. However, that location was a bit of a tough one to make a go of as a business in. He recalled one instance where somebody came in, said they liked the record he was playing, asked to see it, and then did a grab and run of a radio that he had for sale. So eventually Herman would give up the one-stop premises and turn it over to singer Derek Harriott, who would establish his own store there. Derek Harriott and Neville Fu Loy, old school chums, so it was quite an amicable takeover. Derek Harriott would maintain the one-stop shop right up to the present day, as far as I know, though not in the same location. Herman's next move would be to move to the prominent KG's record store. KG's had been a supplier of his one-stop shop, and he moved over to them, becoming one of their top salesmen, further honing his knack for pushing records, having an ear for what was hot. This was the time when Jamaican music was pumping out a flurry of 45s, countless ones released every week. He knew his customers wanted what was hot, what was out right now, not last week's leftovers, and he had a talent for zeroing in on the hot tunes, pushing them, promoting them, and soon became the top record seller at KG's. Shortly after, he would begin DJing, as in spinning records at a club, at clubs affiliated with the KG stores, including the Lotus A-Go-Go and the Spinning Wheel, and opening or emceeing for live bands like the Now Generation and the Inner Circle Band. While at KG's, Herman did his first dabbling in record producing. He'd gotten in touch with musician and singer Lloyd Charmers, and would be in combination with Lloyd Charmers that Herman would put out his own first productions. He wanted something exotic, something that would catch the listener's attention right away, get their interest. So he would put out a couple of instrumentals with Lloyd Charmer. This was a time when instrumentals were very common in Jamaican music. All the producers were putting out instrumentals as well as vocals. And he would put out a couple on a label he called Aquarius. He was settling on trying to figure out a name. The Hair musical was big at the time. This was around 1969. Herman himself was a Cancer. He didn't think that was a very appealing name for a record buyer, so he came up with Aquarius, in part inspired by the famous Hair musical. He would put out a couple of instrumentals with Lloyd Charmers, one called Shanghai and another called African Zulu, also known as Black Coffee. This song would show Herman's quirky sense of eccentricity, his sense of humor. He didn't want to do things exactly the same as the other producers were doing. He wanted to put his own mark on the music, and African Zulu, aka Black Coffee, would include the overdubbed sound effects of coffee being slurped and even audible belches as Lloyd Charmers lays down a piano lead. Step for Herman would be to strike out fully on his own. He would leave the KG's record store to set up his own premises, a record shop he would call Aquarius, like his record label. And he found a fortuitous location for it at 9 Constant Spring Road in the Halfway Tree area of Kingston, directly adjacent to a busy bus stop, which would bring a steady stream of foot traffic into the store. He would set up speakers on the sidewalk, be pumping music outside to draw customers in, while he himself acted as a master of ceremonies / shop proprietor in and out of the store, interacting with people on the street, socializing, but always with an eye on pushing records and creating a sense of enthusiasm and excitement. He would dress in hippie-inspired, flamboyant clothes. He was an unmistakable presence on the Halfway Tree streets. And as he got fully into record production, he began utilizing existing rhythm tracks that he would source either from Lloyd Charmers, Glenn Adams, organist Glenn Adams, or the band that Adams was part of called the Hippie Boys, which would also include Alva Reggie Lewis and the bass and drum team of Aston Barrett and his brother Carlton, who would later join Lee Perry's Upsetters and then form the nucleus of Bob Marley and the Wailers. Herman later on would also work with the Now Generation Band, who he had opened shows for, emceed shows for their live performances. He would use existing rhythm tracks such as the Ethiopians' Everything Crash, which had been recorded at Studio One. He would do that over in a different style as Reggae in the Fields. He would also use other Studio One rhythms such as Drum Song, Darker Shade of Black, which had originally been nicked from the Beatles' Norwegian Wood, a slight influence. And Herman would also come up with a lot of fanciful artist credits for his records that he was putting out on his Aquarius label, and also another label called Scorpio, keeping with the astrological theme. While the music was played by either the Hippie Boys, Lloyd Charmers, or the Now Generation Band, he would come up with fanciful names like Sounds Unlimited, The Aquarians, or Herman's All-Stars. Herman himself would do a bit of singing, a bit of DJing. If the mood struck, the vibes were right, he would do a bit of nonsensical rhyming DJ pattern over top some of the records, inspired by early DJs like Sir Lord Comic. But perhaps the most common fictitious artist credit he would use on his records was Augustus Pablo. Again, he wanted something exotic sounding that would create a sense of mystique, of intrigue, that would get listeners, record buyers interested in his products. And Augustus Pablo was inspired by his love of spaghetti westerns. Reportedly, he had found the name in a Mexican magazine, thought it sounded good, so he put it on his records. It would appear as the pseudonym for Lloyd Charmers on that very early record, African Zulu, aka Black Coffee, but there was no actual Augustus Pablo. It wasn't an actual person, just a made-up name for records with lead organ or keyboard by either Lloyd Charmers or Glenn Adams, until one day in 1971 when a slight-built teenager named Horace Swaby wandered into the Aquarius record shop. He was looking to buy records for the sound system that he ran with his brother Garth, and that day he happened to be holding a melodica. If you don't know what a melodica is, it's basically a child's instrument, keys, which you play while blowing into the end. Basically a child's toy. Horace Swaby had been lent it by a family friend, and this intrigued Herman Chin-Loy. He asked Horace if he could play the melodica, to which he replied he could, and proceeded to demonstrate. Herman was immediately struck by the sound of the instrument, thought he could do something with it. The young youth, Horace Swaby, had already recorded a couple of songs at Studio One, playing the organ, not the melodica, but those had never been released, so he had not yet been recorded. Herman would proceed to book some studio time at Randy's studio on North Parade and take young Horace Swaby over there, where they would record a song called Iggy Iggy, a melodica instrumental, an instrument that everybody thought was a joke, a child's toy that nobody took seriously as a lead or professional instrument. And over top of this song, Herman would deliver one of his nonsensical toasts inspired by Sir Lord Comic. This would be the first moment where Herman Chin-Loy would make reggae history by discovering Horace Swaby, who would later become Augustus Pablo.
Good afternoon. Here's the news. Great booga booga from Oruga. Mom, you dada job center. My killer bram bram lock to me snark ogity while I present this Iggy Iggy. Head cop.
That very very first recording with a teenaged Horace Swaby playing melodica, the nonsensical Iggy Iggy featuring rhyming jive talk by Herman himself, was based off a rhythm from the Heptones called Why Did You Leave? As Herman got deeper and deeper into record production, he would source rhythm tracks from the musicians he was working with, would add Augustus Pablo instrumentals in and amongst the other artist names he was using, some of them made up. The instrumental side of Herman Chin-Loy Productions was spotlighted on this compilation, Augustus Pablo and Friends. The and Friends is key, as it's not all Horace Swaby on here. Some of these tunes are led by Lloyd Charmers or Glenn Adams. The Red Sea compilation on Aquarius, red vinyl, but this is put out by the Black Solidarity label in the UK. And this includes Iggy Iggy itself, as well as the Red Sea and East of the River Nile, an instrumental that Horace Swaby would be associated with forevermore. He would update it later on when he went into production for himself with his Rockers label, but the original cut done for Herman Chin-Loy. The early phase of Herman's productions, by the way, was summed up in 2004 by the Pressure Sounds reissue label in the UK with their Aquarius Rock compilation, showing the Aquarius record shop, a crowd on the street, as was probably a daily occurrence, with the bus stop located right there. Double LP compilation from Pressure Sounds, including vocals, instrumentals, versions, DJ chatter by Herman himself, seen there on the back in his younger days. This would include songs like The Red Sea itself. They would also Pressure Sounds would also put out a 10-inch sampler around the same time as that compilation, featuring 2 rhythm tracks used by Herman Chin-Loy. Side A, The Red Sea, leading off a cut of the darker shade of black rhythm, originally laid down at Studio One in the late 1960s, with a hook kind of nicked from the Beatles' Norwegian Wood. This would be followed up by Darkest Night by James Eastwood. No clue, probably a made-up name by Herman, maybe combining his love of Clint Eastwood with James Bond, but there's no other credits for James Eastwood other than the songs recorded for Herman, as well as Darker Shade of Red, another Augustus Pablo cut, which in one of Herman's little sly moves, Herman, a big jazz lover, putting a lot of effort into the arrangement of his songs, and Darker Shade of Red would include a little quote from Nina Simone's My Baby Just Cares for Me. Meanwhile, on side B of this sampler, we have 3 cuts of the drum song rhythm, also originally created at Studio One, with James Eastwood coming up with Inner Space, with a melodica instrumental, kind of psychedelic cut with more horns in the mix, and Middle East Skank credited to Sounds Unlimited, probably a fictitious name. As Herman himself would do the occasional record under his own name. To the Fields, an enthusiastic DJ outing by Herman, can be found on Keep On Coming Through the Door on Trojan Records, late 1980s. Keep On Coming Through the Door. Herman with To the Fields, a occasional artistic effort from himself. original recording of East of the River Nile for Herman Chin-Loy, young Horace Swaby would permanently assume the name of Augustus Pablo with Herman's blessing. Organist Glenn Adams had also played on that original cut of East of the River Nile, but he would move to the US the following day after the session, leaving Augustus Pablo to hold that name. East of the River Nile would lend a title to an iconic album by Horace Swaby, by now permanently known as Augustus Pablo, on his own Rockers label, and it would be another rhythm track that Augustus Pablo would be permanently associated with that would originally be recorded with Herman. That song can be found on that Aquarius Rock compilation from Pressure Sounds as the very last track, I Man. Horace Swaby would later do over that track, giving it the new name of Cassava Peace, and a few years later voice a young singer called Jacob Miller over it as Baby I Love You So, which then would be turned over to King Tubby for mixing and become perhaps the ultimate expression of dub, perhaps the greatest dub album ever recorded. It would become the title track, King Tubby Meets the Rockers Uptown, based on the bass line of I Man, aka Cassava Piece, originally recorded for Herman Chin-Loy. Herman's work with singers, meanwhile, would include early efforts from future stars like Beres Hammond, as well as a young Dennis Brown, on his way to becoming the crown prince of reggae. For Herman, Dennis would record the very soulful songs My Mother Used to Sing, also reissued here by Pressure Sounds. I also have that on an Aquarius reissue. Hopefully you can see that. Dennis Brown, songs My Mother Used to Sing. The B-side here says version, but it is actually a DJ cut by U-Roy, who had acquired a cut of the rhythm and used it for Linger You Linger, which would also come out on his own Migo Ann label. Somehow acquired a cut from Herman Chin-Loy. Another iconic song produced by Herman Chin-Loy was the great Alton Ellis, who recorded Alton's Official Daughter, classic song for Herman Chin-Loy here on Herman's Scorpio label. The song apparently written while Herman was sitting in a mango tree, him and Alton trading lyrics back and forth to come up with the song. Classic vocals by Herman, but perhaps best known for his instrumentals and his versions, which is hinted at on the B-side of Alton's Official Daughter with Aquarius dub.
I remember the song my mother used to sing each and every morning. There's a flower blooming outside. My little daughter is a good, good daughter. Oh, my little daughter, she is a groovy little daughter. The daughter can rock all night. Oh, the daughter can do it all right.
Herman's next major innovation would come about when he noticed customers in his shop coming in asking for dub music. Dub was a relatively recent development, a newer term, and it was mainly heard in the open-air sound system dances, where people could pay a fee at the gate to get in, go dance, and listen to music that they would not be able to hear anywhere else, including dubs contained on the exclusive acetate discs, sometimes called dub plates, which would be commissioned by the sound system owners and could only be played by them, and included new mixes of familiar songs with the vocals removed completely or in part, over which their DJs could chat live on the microphone. Herman got the idea of creating a set of dubs that he could sell in his shop. Not everybody could get access to the actual acetate dub plates. You had to be connected. They were very expensive to commission. He got the idea to have something that was commercially available but still preserved the aura of exclusivity. He would collect a series of his rhythms and take them down to Dynamic Studio, mix them with the assistance of the Dynamic Studio engineer Carlton Lee, the whole process taking less than an hour, and the result was one of the very first dub LPs to hit the market. Herman maintains it is the very first, very possible, as it is beyond question. It's one of the first handful of dub LPs to ever hit the market. Aquarius Dub would originally be released by Herman with no label at all, no cover, no track titles, to preserve the mystique of owning a dub plate. He would charge more for it compared to a regular LP, but it was still far more affordable than trying to get an actual dub plate. This would contain versions to some of his most famous rhythms, including Ja Ja Dub, a version of that rhythm track, I Man, that would later be done over by Augustus Pablo as King Tubby Meets the Rockers Uptown. Would also include versions of Alton's Official Daughter by Alton Ellis, and others. Would include Dennis Brown's cover of Carole King's It's Too Late, the only vocal on the album, under the title Rest Yourself. Extremely rare to own an early pressing of this. This is again a more modern 2000s repressing from Black Solidarity in the UK on red vinyl. The date 1971 given on the back, a bit apocryphal there. Some sources say 71, some say 1973, but Herman himself maintains this is the very first dub LP ever to come out in Jamaica, himself pictured on the cover with the free-flowing psychedelic hippie vibes of the time, and backing by members of the Now Generation Band, along with Aston Barrett, later of the Wailers. Success of Aquarius Dub, one of possibly the very first dub LP ever to be released, prompted Herman to reissue it a little bit later on, now with the familiar cover art with track titles in place of the non-existent labels of the original pressing. He would also issue a second volume a couple of years later. I've never even heard Aquarius Dub Volume 2, even appears to be even rarer than the early pressings of the first one. But by the mid-1970s, he began to slow down on producing. He had other responsibilities, other demands on his time, including running the record shop and setting up a state-of-the-art recording studio, also to be called Aquarius. To help out with this, he brought in his brother Lloyd Chin-Loy as a partner in the business, and with assistance from an engineer based out of Wales, UK, they would set up the Aquarius recording studio. It would become a quite busy one where artists could come and know they could work in peace without the hangers-on that other studios downtown in the more rough and tumble ghetto areas would attract. But Herman Chin-Loy's own productions slowing down in this period. However, the studio would see what's been called the first successful soul reggae LP, the debut by Beres Hammond, singer with the Zap Pow reggae group, going in more of a soulful reggae direction. Soon to be a superstar in reggae on his own. This is not a Herman production, but would appear on Water Lily, a label associated with the Aquarius studio run by Herman and his brother Lloyd, the debut solo album by Beres Hammond. The studio would also be used for a host of albums by other artists, again, not Herman productions, but would be used in part for albums such as Peter Tosh's Equal Rights and Bunny Wailer's Black Heart Man, recorded in part at Aquarius Studios. The studio for 24 tracks would never really be known for its drum and bass sound. It's kind of puzzled Herman. Bunny Lee tells a story of Herman borrowing the drum kit from Channel 1 studio, Channel 1 then firing on all cylinders with its very drum-centric rocker sound. Herman brought the actual drum kit from Channel 1, put it in Aquarius Studios, still couldn't get quite the same sound. Bunny Lee said, "It's not the drum kit, it's the man who plays it." In that case, Sly Dunbar. But the 24-track capabilities of the studio would attract a host of musicians interested in more of a wider spectrum of sound than the very raw roots and culture, bass and drum-oriented roots reggae of the period, and musicians such as Harold Butler with Africa on My Mind, again on Water Lily, along with musicians such as Boris Gardner and the great hornsman Cedric Brooks would all congregate at Aquarius Studio, form sort of a loose coalition of musicians. The great United Africa album by Cedric Brooks, unfortunately not in my collection, but that also appearing on the Water Lily label around the same time. In the late 1970s, using many of the same musicians from those albums, Harold Butler, Cedric Brooks, and so on, Herman would issue 2 LPs under a group name of Musicism. Musicism being a new concept he had developed to move away from capitalism, from socialism, from anything that was dividing the people in those turbulent years in Jamaica in the late 1970s, would issue 2 LPs under that group name using that loose coalition of musicians. The name would resurface in the early 1980s when he set up a Musicism label and another one called Selection Exclusive as Herman began to get into record production again. By now, the sound had changed to the early dance hall sound, and Herman would move with the times. He would also expand the Aquarius record shop by establishing a satellite store in Miami. He would purchase a bunch of unused blank 12-inch single sleeves that had been left over from the TK Disco label and would issue his newer recordings in those. Very limited quantities, only a few distributed overseas, the rest sold in his Aquarius record shops, many of them quite rare and expensive nowadays. He would issue singles and some vocal and dub LPs with singers like Linval Thompson, Ernest Wilson, George Nooks, and others. all of those quite collectible nowadays. In 2023, the Pressure Sounds label again would reissue 2 of the dub LPs from this early 1980s period. 1983, these originally surfaced as Musicism dub, collecting LPs which are listed on Discogs under the original unlovely names of Dub LP number 1 and number 2. I think no cover art, no titles. Herman in studio with singer Ernest Wilson. Musicism dub reissued by Pressure Sounds. Herman in the early 1980s period, moving with the dance hall sound of the times. Following this, Herman would continue to maintain his Aquarius record shops, moving back and forth between Jamaica and Miami. He would give a start to the dance hall artist Tiger, produced his very first record, would go on to make a name for himself. Tiger had worked for him in the Jamaican Aquarius record shop. Into the 1990s, well into the downloading era, Herman would continue to operate the record shops. However, a schism would break out between himself and his brother Lloyd. There would be a litigation between the two of them, which would end up with Lloyd taking control of the recording studio and Herman being left with the shops, which he would maintain well into the downloading the CD era, though he appears to be out of the music business now, though still out and about doing different business ventures. He's also a chef, very much a Renaissance man. Herman Chin-Loy, perhaps not quite as recognized as he should be for his major contributions in launching the career of Augustus Pablo and for putting out what is possibly the very first dub LP ever. This has been my look at Herman Chin-Loy. Hope you enjoyed, guys.